Perhaps there is no greater unclarity in the entire discussion of science and religion than the meaning of the term religion. People who are very competent in science often speak as though there is no problem there. One recent article started, well, we all know what religion is, so now let's turn and talk about science. I think that in fact, it's just about the reverse. There are disagreements about the nature of science among philosophers of science, but the disagreements are pretty clear, and there's a wide area of agreement. But almost no one even attempts to deal with, in a precise way, with what counts as a religious belief. So that's where I'm going to start. There's more to religion than belief, to be sure. There are rites and rituals, practices, styles of life, and so on. But all of them have their significance because of what is believed about them. So I want to start with that question, what is a religious belief? Not which one is right or wrong, but how do we tell whether we're looking at one or not? When I first began to teach comparative religion, I wondered a lot about that. I consulted a lot of books and found widely disagreeing definitions of religion, almost all of which seemed to me to be at least partly wrong. And as I taught more and more, it dawned on me what I thought that they all had in common and what could serve as such a definition. Then I worked it out, and I became elated to think that I had made a real discovery here, and that maybe I could make a magnificent new contribution to all these studies. Then I read a bit further, and I found that that same definition had been held by virtually every pre-Socratic thinker, by Plato, by Aristotle, by virtually every medieval thinker. It had been repressed by the Enlightenment, but nevertheless held in the 19th century at least by Schleiermacher. And in the 20th century, and here I will just read you a few of the names of the people who arrived at this same definition. William James, Paul Tillich, A.C. Bouquet, Herman Dooyeweerd, Norman Kemp Smith, the great comparative religion scholar Mircea Eliade, Will Herberg, Hans Kuhn, Joachim Bach, Paul Chenot, C.S. Lewis, Robert Neville, just to name a few. It's like inventing algebra for yourself and then discovering somebody beat you to it. But it remains an enormous mystery how this definition is still so widely repressed. I have no idea how to explain that, but let me tell you what it is. At the core of every religion, there is a belief in something or other as divine. Who or what is divine is disagreed on widely. But what it means to be divine is agreed on universally. The difference between those two questions, what is divine and what does it mean to be divine, is analogous to the question, who's the President of the United States? We could either describe the office of the President or the person who holds it. And in a close election, there may be real disagreement over who that office holder is. But there will still be universal agreement on what that office is, which is to be held by one or another of the candidates. Now, if that's clear, I then want to say that it's very remarkable to find that kind of universal agreement. In every religion, the divine is what has unconditional reality, while everything else depends on it or them. Whether you think that is God, Brahmanatman, Dharmakaya, the Tao, it's still the status of divinity that is agreed upon. And the disagreement is over who or what holds the status. The same thing I have found, however, to be true in ancient myths of Babylonia, the Roman myths, the Greek myths, and so on. In fact, in all of my reading, I can't find an exception to this. And I don't ask you to take this on the basis of my own reading, but remember all the other people whose reading and experience came to the same conclusion. For that reason, I think the empirical basis for this definition is absolutely overwhelming. And I will repeat, I have no idea why in religious studies or in discussions of the relation between religious belief and science, this definition never seems to surface or even be considered. I have a suspicion, though, about one reason why it doesn't. Because if you've understood what I've said about this definition, it follows that philosophical naturalism is in fact a religious commitment. If someone says the self-existent reality that generates all else is God or Brahmanatman, they call that religion. But when somebody says it's matter or space or matter and logical laws or space and mathematical laws or whatever, then all of a sudden they claim that's science and not religion. That's called self-deception. It matters not what you put into the slot of divinity, it's still a divinity. And it's your religious belief, whether you call it that or not. You simply have a different idea of the divine from the idea held by a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, but not no idea of divinity. That's why the Psalm says the fool said in his heart there is no God. It's because the whole while he says that he has one. I think that perhaps the resistance on the part of those who hold the naturalist position to the other religions of the world make them want to say that they don't have a religion at all. In fact, they do. The old-timey name for deifying the cosmos or some part of it was paganism. And in the ancient world, it was admitted to be a religion, and today its advocates deny it. But that's just because they don't like the other world religions, because all the major world religions are at one in agreeing that it's not the cosmos or any part of it that's divine. So there is the great divide between the naturalists and the supernaturalists. But they're all equally religious, never the same, all the same. Now, there is a connection then between religious belief and what is called reduction, or reductionism, in philosophy and in science. And of course, Professor Niculescu has already pointed out that that term reduction has many, many senses, and many of them are not connected to religion in the way that I'm going to say is objectionable. So I'm going to try to narrow it to the senses that are. This is what usually happens in theories of reality, and ontology or metaphysics. The reductionist claim is that everything that we know of, or everything in reality, actually has only this nature. All the rest is illusion, mistake, or all the other alleged kinds of properties that things may have are actually identical with this kind. I'm going to use materialism as my example here this morning. It's not the only example, but it's one that's very prevalent. The materialist claims that everything in reality is exclusively physical. That's one version. It eliminates every other kind of properties that a thing may have. There are no distinctly logical properties, no distinctly sensory properties, no distinctly biological properties. There are no distinctly spatial properties, let alone social or economic. It's all really only physical. That kind of claim has been called nothing buttery by one thinker. It's all really nothing but this. But there's another version, and I think it's just as pernicious, although it looks more innocent. And that's to claim that there are exclusively physical realities that then produce all the rest, that cause the rest in a metaphysical sense of cause. Now, I need to distinguish that sense of cause from the sense in which science usually seeks. What works in science is that one thing is the cause of another in the sense of being a precondition for it. So if I heat a copper wire, the wire glows green. The heating of the wire is the precondition, we would say, the cause of the green glow. That's not the metaphysical sense of cause. The metaphysical sense is that one thing is the reason there are such things as the other in the world. Heating a copper wire is not the reason there are such things as green glows in the cosmos. If you make that claim, then you are claiming that the physical is the metaphysical cause of everything else. That's equally objectionable because it's equally a religious belief. What scientists use is the preconditioned sense of cause, but when you press them about philosophy or religion, what they come up with, they then jump to the metaphysical sense. So, for example, take some of the cases that have been cited already in some previous talks. Is there neuron firing in brains that's associated with beliefs and thoughts? Of course. But is that all there is to a belief or thought? That's the eliminative claim. Are they fully the metaphysical cause, the reason there are such things at all? Or are they mere preconditions? If you say that they're fully the cause of why there are such things at all, then they completely explain the other. And that's precisely what I wish to deny. That's the sense of these two senses of reduction. There is only this, or we've located the exclusively physical that is the reason for the existence of everything else. Both claims make matter divine. They are both religious beliefs brought into science and into philosophy. Dragged in by the heels. They are not derived from science or philosophy. They're brought to it. Now, what I want to do this morning, besides making clear the nature of religious belief and its connection to reduction in the objectionable senses, is to give you an argument as to why such reductions are themselves not able to be justified in the way theories are. There are no arguments that can be produced for them. And that I will use to reinforce my claim that they are religious beliefs. They are not beliefs held on the grounds of evidence or argument. Again, I'm going to use physicalism as my example. Before I do, I need to draw a distinction between two ways that any thing may possess its properties. I'm going to call them active and passive. This yellow piece of paper is yellow to our experience in relation to us. But that yellow color is not somehow inherent in this object. It takes a perceiver in relation to it to experience that. So the paper doesn't have yellow color independent of our experience, but in relation to it. That's what I call a passive property. The paper does have weight and mass actively, but not just in relation to us. But that doesn't mean that the paper has no sensory quality whatsoever in the paper itself. It would have to be subject to sensory laws and have the capacity to be perceived as yellow. Has to have that for us to perceive it as yellow. Let me use another example. The piece of paper doesn't think logically. But were it not subject to logical laws, we could not form a concept of it. Passively, it's subject to those laws, even if it doesn't actively think. Just so the paper can be bought and sold. It's passively subject to economic norms of supply and demand, for example, even though it doesn't do any buying and selling. We are the economic active agents in this, but it has to be subject to those norms to be passively valued in that way. I hope those examples are sufficient to explain then that even objects that we think of that are often spoken of as material objects can passively have other kinds of properties. A rock, for example, has spatial and physical properties quite independently of us. But that doesn't mean that it has no sensory qualities, no logical qualities, or qualities of other kinds of properties and laws. If it didn't passively have those capacities, we couldn't perceive it or form a concept of it or so on. Now, in light of that, I want to consider the materialist's claim to have found what everything reduces to. Now, materialists today are very, very chary about coming forward with exactly what it is that is the self-existent reality everything else depends on. Older materialism said it was atoms. That's certainly not true. So we've gone to other things, and today it might be strings or something else. But what materialists do say is that everything is either exclusively physical or caused by the exclusively physical. Even if we can't tell you what exactly those exclusively physical realities are, we know they're physical, and exclusively so. So I want to examine that claim. The claim that something can be exclusively physical. Are neuron firings exclusively physical? Are atoms exclusively physical? Are strings exclusively physical? And my argument will be that they are not, on the grounds that it is impossible for us to think of them that way. We can't so much as frame the idea of anything being exclusively physical. And I say this knowing full well that the prevailing tendency in philosophy is to claim that that's the explanation for everything. I'm telling you, it's the explanation of nothing, because no one can even think of what they're talking about. And my argument for this is not an abstruse, difficult, and long drawn-out logical chain of reasoning that uses modal metaphysics or something like that. The argument for this is one in which you must participate. The argument is a thought experiment, and I'm asking you to make the experiment. Right here and now, where you sit, try to think of something as exclusively physical. That will mean stripping away from it every non-physical property it could have. With me? By physical property, I mean those properties subject to physical laws. They're what physics studies. It's not everything that goes on in physics. What goes on in physics is also breathing and thinking and talking, and right? It's what it studies. Take a rock that we talk about as a physical object and try the experiment on the rock. Strip away from your idea of the rock all quantity. Quantities and numbers are not subject to physical laws. Strip away from the rock every property of spatial location or size. Divest your idea now of anything connected to perception, anything you could see or touch. Divest it also now of any logical property, say being distinguishable from something else. And remove from it any connection to language, such as its capability of being referred to by a natural language or a symbol system. And tell me what you have left. I get nada. This is also then the explanatory power of materialism. The old argument mentioned in the plenary session yesterday, humans are made up of organs, which are made up of cells, which are made up of protein chains, which are made up of atoms, and atoms are purely physical, so human beings are purely physical. That's been around for a long time. Some of the members of the chain change from time to time, so it doesn't end with atoms, and ends maybe with strings or something. Now, but where's the justification of the claim that the atoms or the strings are solely physical? Try that same experiment on them, you'll get the same result. Not only that, you'll not only get the same result, no matter what object's supposed to have it, but even if you take an abstract physical property, say the property of weight. Try to conceive of what you mean. Take your idea of weight and try the same experiment. Weight that has no quantity, it is nowhere, that is not logically distinguishable from anything else or not referable to in language, and it's gone. So it doesn't matter whether you try it with a concrete object or an abstract property. If you want to know why this conference is devoted to anti-reduction, here's an argument, here's a reason why. And I think that this same argument, the same experiment, has the same result no matter what kind of properties and laws you propose as being the only real kind or the one that is the self-existent kind that produces all the others. 60 years ago, the logical positivists would have told us it isn't physical. It's the sensory that everything reduces to. Everything is nothing but conglomerations of sights, tastes, touches, sounds, smells, and if you try that with them, you'll get the same result. What is, for example, the perception of red that has no shape, size, or location, is not quantifiable, is not logically distinguishable, and so on? You use the same procedure, you'll come up with the same result. The whole thing evaporates before your mind's eye. My conclusion there is that the reductionist claims are full of sound and fury and pretense to explanation. But actually they end up in the same epistemological boat with the claim that there are square circles. We can say the words, but we can't frame any idea what we're talking about. And you can say exclusively physical, or exclusively sensory, or exclusively logical, if you wish, but no one then can say what they mean by it, because they can't so much as frame the idea of anything whatsoever fitting that description. In sessions to come, we're going to see why such a non-reductionist view between kinds of properties and laws that things have lead to the conclusion that there are levels to reality that are equally non-reducible. Because as things possess properties in various ways, they form domains which are then not reducible to other kinds of properties and laws, even if the others are preconditions for them. Precondition isn't the same as is the reason there are such things at all, or is the total explanation of. Neither of those follow whatsoever. And we will have other sessions that do this for economics, ethics, mathematics and physics, politics, sociology, theory of perception, and a number of others.